of my subscribers have told me repeatedly that Milo needs a quilt. Now, Milo is our dog, and we love Milo, and so I decided to make a quilt for Milo. Now, the nice thing is I have been able to use a bunch of flannel scraps that I've had. Not only did I use my flannel scraps, but I used my batting scraps. So this quilt hasn't cost me anything. The pattern is called, well, I don't really have a pattern. This is just called a brick wall quilt, or anyway, that's what I'm calling it. So it kind of looks like a brick wall, and I'm going to show you how this all got started. Now, at the very end, there will be some pictures of Milo if you'd like to see Milo. Some of you have seen him in the videos, but this is Milo's new quilt. So I just want to show you what I'm working with here. I had all these scrap pieces of flannel left from rag quilts that I've made, and I was going to throw it all away, and I thought, no, I'm going to do something with that. But you can see that a lot of them are the folded piece when I cut. So I'm just opening those up and pressing them, and I just really need to know what size I have. So most of them are, they're all 9 inches in length, but the smallest ones are about 5 and a half. So I'm going to see what I can make with all of these. There's reds and greens, beautiful, beautiful flannels, really nice quality. I'm going to make something. Okay, so I've decided that I want to cut the fabric, these felt pieces, into 5 by 9 inches. So I just started cutting them, and I'm trying to get as many pieces out of them as I can. Okay, so what I decided to make is this quilt right here. And this is going to be a quilt for Milo. Lots of my subscribers have said Milo needs a quilt, so this is what I'm going to do with all those scraps, the scraps of flannel that I had. And I also have scraps of batting. So my big pieces, this is called, I believe this is called a brick wall quilt. Okay, so for this quilt you just need 2 blocks. You need some that are 5 by 9. I cut them 5 by 9 simply because that's what I had available in my scraps. So these are cut 5 by 9. Then the batting inside, I did put batting on the inside of mine because I like a little bit heavier quilt, and I thought Milo would like a little bit heavier because he likes to bury under there. So the fabric is 5 by 9, and I use just my scrap flannels, and then the batting is 3 by 7. Now the next block is going to be, this square is going to be 5 by 5 1/4. And then the batting square on it, I just cut 3 by 3. And I could have cut it a little bit bigger, but Milo does not like, Milo likes to shred batting, so I wanted to be sure none of the batting was showing. Okay, so in my bucket here, I have lots and lots of batting scraps. And I'm going to use these batting scraps for my quilt. This quilt truly isn't going to cost me a dime because I'm going to use the things that I have, and I'm going to make this work. So you can see all these tiny little scraps that I have. I may have to spend some time cleaning the threads off of them, but this is going to work just great. So I want to encourage you to really try to use what you have, especially for this type of quilt. Now, one thing you can do to save time is cut in batches. You can do lots of things in batches, and one of them is to cut in batches. Now, these batting pieces are for a ragtime quilt, and actually ragtime quilts are pretty forgiving, but I'm just going to do all the batting and cut all this batting up just like I did when I cut all of the scrap flannel up. And so you can see I already have the small pieces cut. I'm just going to clean this up as I go. So one thing you can do to help quilt faster is to do things in batches. Okay, so you can see I have all of the pieces cut. These are all the ones I'm going to use. So now I'm ready to just start sewing. But I'm going to, again, prepare these in batches so that I can sew it more quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take two, and they're going to be wrong sides together. I'm just going to slip the batting piece right in there. And for the batting, I did cut it 2 inches smaller because Milo loves the batting and he loves to shred it, so I definitely don't want any of it to be showing. And I'm just going to put these smaller pieces together, and I'm not going to pin these. The flannel sticks to each other really well. And again, this type of rag quilt, a rag quilt is really forgiving. We're going to be trimming those edges, and you know, these little quilts don't have to be perfect. These are the quilts that are going to get washed a lot and used a lot. So I'm just going to stack all these up, and then I'm going to just sew them one right after another. And as you can see, I'm just going to use my diagonal seam tape. I'm going to get that seam started, and I'm just going to follow that line just like that. That diagonal seam tape really works well for small pieces. I can't really use it very well on large pieces. I'll probably draw the lines on the other pieces. And I'll just keep doing this until these are all done. Then I'll cut them apart and I'll sew the other side. Okay, so now that I have all the little small squares sewn and have the X's sewn on them, I'm going to start on the big ones. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to start marking my sewing lines. I don't have a big enough area to use my seam tape for this size of a square. Actually, this is a rectangle, so I am going to mark all of these. And I just have to mark one side, and then as I mark them, I'm going to go ahead and assemble them. And like I said earlier, the flannel helps hold everything together, and this is a very forgiving quilt, so I'm not going to pin them. So I'll just stack those up there, but the next thing I'll do is I'll mark all of these, and then I'll sew them all. I'll mark them, assemble them, and then sew them. And because I'm doing it in batches, it's going to speed up the process. And hopefully I'll have these done in just a couple of hours. And I did sew one already, so you can see what that looked like, but I just have the X there. And so mark, assemble, and sew. And I'll do that till I have all those done. And then I'll be able to start assembling the quilt and laying it out like I want. Now, I always get asked about this booklet here, and I made this booklet, and I do have a video out on how to do that, and I will provide a link for that video. Okay, now you can see that all of the colors, all of the squares are sewn, and now I just have to start putting them together up on my design wall. Okay, now you can see I have laid out the entire quilt, and I sewed up the first row. And I'm glad I did that because it's not going to be big enough. I'm going to add one more row for the width. And I'm not sure if I'm going to add any more for the length. I may have to once I get the length sewed up. But if I'm going to add on to the width, I need to do that now and not later. So I'm going to add one more row, so I got to dig out my scraps. I think I had a few left. I might be able to eke out enough to add one more row to the width. I think it's looking pretty nice, and I think Milo's going to love it. Now, I wanted to be sure to show you, the last thing I showed you was how I was sewing the quilt together. Now, this is just an example, just a little sample, because I want to show you how I trim the quilt. Now we're going to pretend like this is the whole quilt, and so these all need trimming. Now what I do on the outside edge after I've sewn it together and all the seams are pressed open flat, then I just start trimming. Now these seams are 3/4 of an inch. I've done an inch before but have decided that I like the 3/4 inch better. But let me show you how I trim this. Now I do use these Fiskars scissors to do the trimming. These have been the easiest so far, and I'll put a link for these in the description below if you're interested in these. These have been used a lot. So what I like to do is I like to just trim close. And when you trim this, you want to be sure you do not trim clear down to the seam. You don't want to create a hole. And I just start clipping. And I like to clip, let me clip a few and I'll show you. I like to clip about that small of an area. Now I've done larger, but when it frays I don't quite like the look as well. Okay, so you're going to want to do those, and then I do the same here. Once I have all those others done, then I just trim these. And then I just pull those up together and trim both at the same time, being careful not to cut a hole in my quilt. Okay? Then along the edge, I want to show you what I do. I make the same snips, being careful not to cut into the seam line there, and then I cut this one at a little diagonal, and then just perpendicular to this outside edge stitching. Okay? And the more you sew it, the more you wash it, the nicer it's going to look. Do you like that quilt? Like that quilt? Milo. Now don't forget to watch if you want to see some pictures of Milo, in case you haven't met Milo, but I do have some pictures of Milo. Wes and I both like to take pictures of him. And if you've made a quilt for your dog, be sure to tell me about it in the comments below. Now, I just love the Ragtime quilts, and I think Milo's going to like this. I think this turned out great with all the beautiful flannel scraps that I had. Plus, I got a huge amount of flannel scraps out of my cabinet, as well as the batting. I almost emptied that entire trash can that I showed earlier in my video. So, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't. Please share with a friend, and as always, leave a comment. I love to get the comments and try to reply to each and every one. So until next time, have fun quilting.